I realize that most professors and pastors and ministers, they put a watch down before they start to speak. And some of them I know it's for absolutely no apparent reason. Anyway, this will be for a reason. I did notice, James, that you did not ask for one category of people in your compulsive network. You didn't ask for how many Toronto Maple Leafs fans there were.
I just pray for them anyways.
You just pray for them anyway, yeah, that's right. Yeah, there are some people. Yeah, obviously you know how I vote, and you know how my body is tattooed. As a fan. And for whatever reason it is, somehow over the last 3 years, the Canadians can never beat the Maple Leafs. Now, I will point out that we're much significantly ahead of you in the standings right now, but anyway, we'll just let that one go. But I was with a group of friends the last time Montreal was here, and we got beaten brutally. And so there were about 20 or 30 of us sitting together, and you know, the loudmouth in the group said, Smith, why do you insist on being a Montreal Canadiens fan? And I just looked at him and I said, really, I come by it very simply. My great-grandfather was a Montreal Canadiens fan. My grandfather was a Montreal Canadiens fan. My dad was a Montreal Canadiens fan. I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan. My daughter's a Montreal Canadiens fan. We just come by it honestly. And this loudmouth looks at me and he says, Smith, if my great-grandfather was an idiot, and my grandfather was an idiot, and my father was an idiot, what would that make me? I said, a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. This morning we're going to be looking at sustainable urban community development Canadian side. And I deeply regret that I wasn't able to be with you on Wednesday night and Thursday. Bob Lupton and I serve on a committee together, and we've been communicating over the last couple of weeks, and we're going to benefit from the time together to get caught up. And it's always good to reconnect with Jonathan and Howard and with Rick. So I deeply regret not having been able to come. For those of you that are in the second half of your 50s, you will understand that there are times when things come up, particularly with aging parents, and there's just things that you have to do. And in this case, my wife is going through just a horrific situation with her mom and dad, who are now in their 90s, and she's having to manage all of that. When my mom died 11 years ago, my wife was wonderful in how she pastored me through the death of my mom. And so as I watched what my wife was going through, I called James and I said, James, I think I need to pass on the first day of the forum. I will be there, don't worry. So I am here. The price I paid for staying home to just make sure my wife is in one piece is that I was up at 3:45 this morning on a 5:30 flight down here. But anyway, it's a small price to pay to pastor my wife as she goes through this. This forum is taking place at a very significant moment, actually week in Canada, because yesterday and today, the mayors of the large cities of Canada have been meeting in Regina to discuss issues related, particularly to the infrastructure projects and what needs to take place in our cities. This actually was a forum that was launched by none other than Jane Jacobs when she was still alive and living in the city. And it's significant that we're needing to talk about what does and what will the people of God do in our cities if we're going to contribute to the peace and well-being of our cities, if we're going to get involved in sustainable city, region, community development, church planting, and transformation in the days ahead. It probably begs the question that many of us, as we go back to our communities, probably need to write to our mayors to tell them that while they were doing that, here's what we were doing. Because this is about partnerships at a critical time for our cities. A good hermeneutical model to deal with our issue this morning would obviously want to take what I call the 3 horizons of interpretation seriously. There is obviously what Howard has led us through in terms of the horizon of the text, both in hearing the text, letting the text speak to us, letting the text change us as we think about why and how we do it. Obviously, we come to the text with our own horizon, with our own set of lens. And then there's the horizon of the church, of God's people in the city. And the issues that we understand as we engage the biblical text, as we engage the project of God, and as we take that seriously. And then there's the horizon of the people with whom we minister, with whom we journey, the people in the community that might have, at this point in life, no commitment to God's project or to the biblical texts. Howard has dealt with the first horizon this morning. That really forms a wonderful backdrop for what we want to do. I want to deal primarily with the second horizon. What is the engagement of the people of God in their communities as we talk about transformation, as we talk about seeking the peace and the well-being of the people in our communities? I'll deal with the third horizon as we get to the end, but I'm primarily interested in how we see and engage our communities in the days ahead. Here's the premise that I want us to work off this morning. Place is space with historical meanings, different identities, and varied societal preoccupations. Place is space with historical meanings, different identities, and varied societal preoccupations. From urban geography, we know that place is the specific locations that provide an anchor and a meaning in life. Our sense of place is rooted in individual identities, communities, history, a sense of comfort, a sense of meaning. Obviously, in the modern West, it has everything to do with individuation, particularly with the identity, the personal identity side of who we are. But you can't deal with place without taking the component of space seriously. And this is the medium which is independent of our personal existence. This is the objects and the ideas, if you will, the social imaginaries of people who live in place. And this morning, I want us to explore what sustainable urban community development in Canadian cities looks like. That's place. But I want us to look at it as we move forward in the next decade or so by taking some issues of space, and I want to look at two of them in particular that I think are critical if we're going to do community development in Canadian cities in the days ahead. Let me just begin with three brief preliminary reflections before I tackle these two issues. For those of you that are familiar with any of the stuff that I've read, that I've published on urban issues in Canadian cities, you know that the central tenet of any of my arguments is to affirm that Canadian cities evolve within the social imaginaries of the context within which they're located. In both societal and architectural forms, there are deeply rooted cultural processes that affect how money is spent, how people live, how people think. It's for that reason it goes as simple as, Montreal is not Toronto, Toronto's not Vancouver, Vancouver's not Calgary. It is terribly difficult to generalize about Canadian cities. And you know from my writings that I try to make this long plaidoyer, we would say, which is this advocacy that there are fundamental differences between Canadian urban systems and American urban systems, and that's why we need to take a very different approach to urban community development in Canada than we do in American cities. But that's also true between Vancouver and Montreal. There is uniqueness to our cities. Now, I'll let Americans decide whether or not that's true for their country, although there is one reason why I think there's a whole lot more uniformity and homogeneity going on in American cities, particularly on community development, than there is in Canada. Let me just illustrate this for a minute, out of my own situation. If you've ever been to the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, you know that right in front of the museum is the sculpture of this mammoth cow that has been sculpted in iron. It was done by the Franco-Saskatchewan sculptor, Joseph Farfar. If you want to see something very similar, just go to the TD Centre here in downtown Toronto, because Farfar has contributed there as well. Now, in my less sane moments, I've often said that it's really because of the cow that God saves Montreal every day. And my biblical foundation on that is nothing less than Jonah chapter 4 and verse 10, where God says, "And don't I have a right to have compassion for these 120,000 people who don't know their right hand from their left hand, and the cattle?" We take art seriously.